Hello, welcome to Classical Greek Latin. My name is Josh. I am the teacher for this course. This is the Latin course based on Wheelock's Latin. This is lesson number 2, and we are into chapter 1 now. So our last lesson 1, we did the introduction and the alphabet and all that. And now we are into chapter 1, lesson 2, and we're going to do verbs. So we're going to do first and second conjugation verbs. As you can see here, just for fun, caput means head in Latin. It's also where we get the word captain in English from. But yeah, it's chapter 1. We get the word chapter from this word also. Okay, so conjugations, we're doing verbs. So verbs are, as you know, action words. There are 4 conjugations of verbs. That is 4. The word conjugation means to join together. Kon means together, and then yuga means to like yoke, to join together. So putting the ending of a verb together with its stem, and we'll get into all that in just a second. But there are 4 groupings of verbs that is 4 different stems of verbs, with the third having a variant form of itself. So you could say there are 4 groupings of verbs, or excuse me, 5, but technically 4 with a variation on the third. We'll get into that in chapters to come. For now, we're going to do the first grouping, conjugation, and the second grouping or conjugation. Okay, we're talking about verbs, which is action, right? Run is a verb, for example. But before we go there, let's go over here. We got some notes here. Salve is a traditional greeting in ancient Rome. It means be well. Greetings, right? It doesn't actually mean greetings. It means to be well. So salve, salvation, salve, be well, be healthy, right? Typical greeting in ancient Rome. In English, we have the word welcome, which is similar. You are a well or a pleasant comer or guest, right? Oh, yeah, a happy guest, right? One who comes or arrives at the house. You are welcome. All right, that's just for fun. I recommend reading through all this on your own. I'm not going to read this chapter for you. The lesson would be too long. But let's just touch on some points here. Morphology, word forms. Morph means shape or form. I don't like technical language. You can read the definitions here, that's fine. Morphology is a technical term that refers to the forms of words. Syntax is a Greek word. It means to arrange, basically, to set in order together. And it talks about like how words function together. That is noun, direct object, adjective, those sort of things, right? So let's look here at the bottom. And there we go. All right, so I'll read this for you. Since a verb, from Latin verbum, note the V is not a V, it is, but we pronounce it as wa. So verbum, whose basic meaning is word, describes its subject's activity or state of being, right? So whenever anything happens in the universe, in the world, action has to have a starting point, and that starting point is the subject. Whether it's doing or being or acting, it always begins with the subject. And so going on. And it's thus one of the most important words, that is the verb, in the sentence. Hence, that's why we're covering it in chapter 1. We may best begin our study of Latin with a look at the parts of speech in English, right? The other parts of speech in Latin are the same as those in English. All right, so we're just going to list here. So nouns, person, place, or thing. Let's flip this over. Then we have, get this in focus for you, okay? Pronouns, right? adjectives, adverbs, and prepositions, conjunctions, interjections, and that's it. Okay. So those are the same as in Latin. Um, let's see here. Pronoun is for the noun, literally. So you have personal pronouns like he, she, I, relative pronouns, which is which, that sort of thing. Adjectives are describers, red, hot, cold. Adverbs tell you quickly, slowly. They tell you how the verb is done, right? Towards the verb is what that means. Prepositions, about, before, above, beyond. Usually they are words that are positioned pre the noun that they're describing, right? So from, by, those are prepositions. Conjunctions, and is a conjunction. But interjections, let's see here, like hey, something like that, heyu in Latin. But yeah, so the Latin, English parts of speech, basically the same. All right, and so in Latin, as in English, verbs, that's what we're talking about here. First conjugation of verbs and second conjugation of verbs, groupings. Verbs exhibit the following 5 characteristics, right? Okay, so person, that is going to be who is doing it. And you have first person, second person, and third person. Okay, so first person would be I, right? So I in English is the nominative. I'm doing something, or so I. Okay, then you have second person would be you. Second person is you. Third person is going to be he or she or it, right? And then those come in numbers. That is to say, how many. So is it singular or is it plural? That's all that means. So is it I or is it we? Is it you or is it you all? Okay, or you guys, or yous, however you use your English expression, depending on where you're from. So you have the person, first, second, third person. I, you, he, or we, y'all, they, and then number is singular or plural. And then tense is time, comes from tempus, time. All right, and Latin has 6 tenses, and we'll just list them here. They list them here: present, future, imperfect, perfect, future perfect, and pluperfect. We're going to do present today, and we will get to the other tenses in good time. Okay, mood and voice. I find these easy to confuse with each other, so let's talk about them just briefly. They're not complicated, but the terminology for me is easy to confuse. Mood is going to say the manner of indicating the action, right? So indicative is what we're going to cover today. It's just indicating that something's just facts, something is happening. That's mood or a mode, right? Imperative is it's a command. You are asking or telling that something be changed through action. That is an imperative, right? Close the door is an imperative. Be quiet is an imperative, right? You were speaking, now you're being, the imperative is to not speak, or the door was open. So we're insisting that something be changed and altered. That's an imperative. All right, both introduced in this chapter. So we're going to cover indicative and imperative. Subjunctive, again, which describes in particular hypothetical or potential actions. That will be fun. We will get to that later on. Chapter 28. That's a little complicated, but you'll be ready for it when it comes. So don't stress about it today. Yeah, this chapter we're going to cover indicative and imperative. Very straightforward, very easy. Voice, that is telling us, is it passive or active? That is the subject of the verb doing something to the direct object or just doing something? And the difference there is transitive. He hit the ball would be a transitive, active voice. Let me think here. Versus he is hungry. I don't know. Is that yeah? There's a verb in there, right? Is that intransitive? There's no direct object with an intransitive verb. We'll see those as they come along, and they'll give us a good example coming up here. All right. So active then has a direct object, or it has no direct object, but the subject is doing something. Whereas passive, so you have active voice, and you have passive voice. Something is being done to the subject, right? So active, the boy hits the ball. Passive, the boy is hit by the ball. All right. So that's how those are the parts of a verb. You have person, number, tense, mood, and voice. All right, and that's all there is to a verb. Okay, so conjugation, like I said earlier, means to join together, and you have the difference here between finite verbs, which finite means it's limited to a person. That is, you know who's doing it. Is it I, you, or he? Right? Is it first, second, or third person? That is finite. Infinite, let me push this up. Let me see here. Let me make sure my screen has not frozen. Okay. So here we go. I'm on page 2 up here in case you got lost. And let me know if the screen froze for you. Let me know in the comments if the screen froze, because it froze for me for a second. Okay. So finite verbs tells it's finite, so it's person, first person, second person, third person. A finite verb will tell us that, right? So I praise is finite because it's saying we know who's doing it. It's I. You praise is finite because it's you praising, right? And then he praises, it's he, right? We know the limits of that action. An infinite or infinitive doesn't tell us who's doing it. It is just to praise. It is action without an agent or a person behind it, right? If that makes sense. Okay, so we have finite, person, infinite or infinitive, no person. All right, so personal endings here. Let's see here. So let's see. In personal ending, we don't have these in English really in everything. So we have the word praise, praise, praises in third person singular. All right, and then we have praise, praise, praise. So none of these verbs in English are inflected or conjugated except third person singular. That is the only leftover from Old English, Anglo-Saxon, that we still inflect the third person, right? So if I say I praises, that just feels weird in the English ear, right? But if I say he prays, that also feels weird. So it's I praise, you praise, we praise, you praise, they praise, but he praise is, right? So this is inflected, conjugated, if you will, inflected. Whereas everything else, we in English have to use personal pronouns I, you, we, you, they to signify the person. In Latin, just like in third person singular in English, you have that for all 6 forms, 3 singular, 3 plural. So let's take a look at those real quick. Okay, so we're on page 3 now. Okay, so these are endings that you add on to the stem of a verb, just like you add on that S to the third person singular of praise to make it praises, so he praise is. So in Latin, you do that for every single person, first, second, third, in both singular and plural. So these endings you will want to memorize. And so it's first person is O, that means I'm doing something. Second person, you add an S, that means you are doing something, singular. Third person singular, you add a T, he, she, or it is doing something. And then in the plural, we is going to add a mus. Second person plural, you can add tis. And third person plural, we're going to add nt. All right, so let's get some sample verbs here so this makes a little more sense. Okay. All right, let's cover the infinitive just because they have it next. When you are describing a verb, you can write it in the order that they have here. Now, this may seem irrelevant or not make sense as to why I'm talking about this. I will put the mood of the verb, if you will, in the middle. So I will describe a verb as it is present. Okay? So whenever you describe a verb, you're going to go back to this list on page 2. Right? So whenever we call it parsing, it means to cut up a verb, that is to describe its parts. So you will always describe a verb in this order. So the person, you always say, okay, it's first person, singular, and then what I will do is I put the mood after the number, right? So it will be like indicative, infinitive, imperative, subjunctive, right? And then after the mood, then I'll put the tense, and then you don't have to put voice, right? So just those first 4. So person, number, and then mood, and then tense, right? So when we go over here, so we would say, if this were indicative, we would say first person singular, present, indicative, active, right? So it'd be, we do include the active, I'm sorry. So it would be the tense, the mood, and then the voice. That's how I write it out. And I have a reason for that. I think in the long run, it's easier to remember verbs, but you may do it like this in that order if you like. Okay, so we have some Latin words here. We have laudare and monere. So remember, we talked about 2 conjugations. The first 2 are groupings. You have the first grouping is laudare, and the second grouping is monere. Now, this word here means to praise. Okay, that when I say grouping, I'm not talking about just the idea of praising as a group of verbs. It's just, to praise is just a sample. What's important here is this a, this ah. All right, so you have this ah here, and that it's a long ah with a macron over it, and that tells us that this verb is first conjugation. That is, the root stem of this verb is always going to have this ah in it. Okay, so there are many other verbs that the stem, so the stem here you say is loud, but then the ah tells you the conjugation is first conjugation, right? And then the re, that shows us that this is infinitive. To praise, that is, there's no person, one person doing, it's just to praise as a sample, right? Monere, you have a long, now be mindful of my pronunciation here. A, that is in English E, right? So a for the first conjugation, and then a, monere, right? That tells us, right, the stem of this word is mon, and then the conjugation is shown to us by the long a, and then the re tells us that this is infinitive. That is to say, there's no ost or mustis nt on it to tell us a person, first, second, or third. It's just re, monere. So it's without person. That is to say, it's infinitive, and that, of course, means to advise or to admonish. All right. Okay. So let's read this here real quick. So the are ending with its stem a, stem vowel, identifies a verb as first conjugation. Ere and the a characterize second conjugation verb. Okay, we're skipped. Characterize second, excuse my tone is wrong. Characterize second conjugation verbs. Okay, and I've talked about the 4 conjugations already. Drop the re, the actual infinitive ending. We talked about that just now. And you have the present stem. Okay, so you have 2 things going on here. If you have the a in laudare tells us this is first conjugation, right? So that a is going to stay around. And you'll see that in a moment. Monere, the long a sound, tells us it's second conjugation, right? Once we drop off the re, we have now given ourselves the present stem, that is the foundation for the present tense, that is things happening in the now, to add these endings on to. Okay, this will make more sense when we get into the vocabulary towards the end. All right, so let's just flip the page here and we'll jump into it. And again, I recommend reading every paragraph here, but I don't want this lesson to be too long. Okay, so we have laudare, right? So you're going to drop the re and then add your endings, right? So remember, the endings are o, s, t for the singular, first, second, third person, and then mus, tis, enti, nt for first, second, third person, plural. All right, so a couple of things happen is that ah stays long, okay? In every person, 1 second. Again, right now my screen is frozen for me. Let me know if it is frozen for you also. All right, it's back. Okay, so don't get hung up on the long, short ahs here. So it's a long ah, right? If you could see that, let me zoom in a little closer. So I wouldn't get hung up on that. These things will really just through repetition get into your mind. But you notice that, okay, so we have lauda as the stem, right? And remember, we took off the R. I'm going to do cursive with Latin, right? So we dropped off the RE, which shows that it's infinitive, and that gives us the stem, so lauda, right? So that's going to be a long Now, when we start adding the endings, right? Let's see here. We have O, S, T, and then you have mus, tis, nt. When we add those on, you're just adding that ending onto that right? So you have, let's do laudas first, second person singular. So you have lauda, and then you're going to add that S. Okay, so then you have laudas. So that's what's happening here. Okay, that's what you got. You're just adding that S to the stem, lauda. And that ah tells us that this is the first grouping of verbs, the first conjugation. So that is true of everything here. You see laudas, laudat, laudamus, laudatis, laudant, except first person singular in the first conjugation, which is what this is. The ah is going to drop out, and you're just going to have laudo. So you don't have laudao, you have, which is what you would expect, you have laudo, which means I praise, right? So in English now we need the I, we need the personal pronoun, I praise. In Latin, just saying laudo implies I praise. You don't have to say ego laudo. Ego means I in Latin. You could, but it would be redundant, right? Because Latin is inflected consistently throughout the entire language, which is nice. And English used to be that way, but it is no more. But I digress. All right, so laudo, I praise. Laudas, you praise. Laudat, he praises. All right, and that's just, we're adding the endings ost, first, second, third person. And then in the plural, again, I know this is repetitive. Laudamus, laudatis, laudant. So it's just we praise, you all praise, and then they praise. Now, you probably have noticed that in the third person plural, you have a short ah. Don't get hung up on this, but just be aware of it. And in third person singular, you have a short ah, right? And they explain that down here. Let me zoom out a little bit. They explain that down at the bottom of the page here where I have the star. So just read through that, and they don't explain why this is so, but just be aware that it is so. Yeah, and then also one other thing here I have a note to myself, no accent, is they put accents here in Greek. We call these acute. I guess they're still acute accents in Latin. But anyway, don't get bogged down in all that. They put accents here just to be consistent with the accent rules to show you what it looks like. When you write these conjugations out yourself, you do not have to do accents. Hence my note, no accents. You don't have to write the accent. I would tell you, do mark the long vowels. Right now, it's not crucial, but when we come to the third conjugation, so this is laudo, laudas, mones, as, es, first conjugation, second conjugation. So first conjugation, as, second conjugation, es. It is easy to see the distinction there because you have a. Third conjugation, you're going to have an a, but it's going to be short. So unless you have a long mark to show you the difference, it is, if you don't have that long mark, you cannot tell the difference between the second conjugation and the third conjugation in the second person, that is. So I'm just warning you, make sure to learn the long marks and use those, but you do not have to do the accents. Okay, so do the macron. Let's see here. So sample would be, so we have a, macron, yes. Do the macron. Okay, you have a over here. Do the macron. These accents, like so, you do not have to write those, even though they have written them for you in the book. I think that makes sense. All right, let's move on to the next page here, see what we got. And lo and behold, got the imperative mood. Okay. Now again, I would put that word right there. So I would describe these, if I were parsing these on a test in class. I do not give tests, but if you were in a traditional classroom, this is how I would parse this out in that order. Present, imperative, active, right? So you have tense, mood, voice, right? Active tells us that the subject is doing it to something. The subject is doing it, right? Versus passive, where it's done to the subject. And then imperative tells us the kind of action, right? Indicative, imperative, subjunctive, and then present tells us when it's happening. Okay. Again, that's just word to the wise. That's how I do it, and I would advise doing it that way also. But you may do as you please. All right. So imperative just means, like we talked about earlier, you say close the door. That is, the door is open, and now you want the world, the universe, to be altered and changed. Did I say the door is open? Yeah, the door is open, so you want it to be changed. You tell someone close the door. That is an imperative, right? Now, yeah, so you give imperatives in the second person, right? You don't command yourself to do something. And in Latin, you don't command a third person, like a third party, like you don't say, let him close the door. Now in Greek, you have third person imperative, but that's a whole nother story. And you can take the Greek course also if you like, which is available on this channel. But I digress again. So in Latin, imperative only comes in second person. Now it can come in second person singular. You're commanding a single person to say close the door. Or you're saying second person plural, a group of people, you all close the door. Perhaps it's the gates of a city requires a group of people to close the gate, right? You all close the gate. So anyway, imperative, second person only, singular or plural. Okay? So how do you form? So we formed the finite verbs, right? Laudo, laudas, laudat, laudamus, laudatis, laudant, right? I praise, you praise, he praises, we praise, you all praise, they praise, and then moneo, mones, monet, monemus, monetis, monent, right? So we have now, they show us how to get the imperative. So you have, again, the original form from the dictionary, lauda, and then re, right? So you're going to drop the re, which tells us it's infinitive. So once we drop it, it's no longer infinitive. And now here, that ah sound is going to be long. And if we just drop that re, we now have second person singular imperative. You praise. Okay. Same thing for monere, right? You're going to write this out for you. So you have monet and then re. You drop that re, the a is long, and now you have advise, admonish, second person singular, right? Now, to do second person plural, you are going to say take lauda, and then you're going to add te, laudate. Okay, and you could guess again from monere, you're gonna have. Give me 1 second. So from monere, you're gonna have monete. So you're adding. I'll write it out for you. Monet plus te. Monete. Right. You all advise. Let me check something real quick. Okay. Very good. All right. Let's read the section here on adverbs. In Latin and English, an adverb is a word that modifies a verb. An adjective or another adverb, and is typically positioned before the word. Ad verbum means to or towards the word, or they say next to. You could, no, that's fine. Near the word. Ad literally means to or toward, but next to, near, same idea. Non and saipe appear in the following vocabulary, and many other words and many others will be introduced in subsequent chapters. Okay, so adverbs, right? So yeah, all right. Nothing very special there. They give you some samples here. Let's skip that for now, and let's get into the vocabulary. All right. All right, so our vocab begins in earnest on page 6. And I'm just going to read this through for you and kind of explain things as I go. So you have, now, disclaimer, this is really our first full chapter of Latin, so they are going to give us some of this in piecemeal. That is to say, they're going to give us some words that should be grouped with other words, but we haven't studied those other words yet, so they're going to omit those other words and just give us a word like may by itself. And that will make more sense later on. But just know that this list of words is very good, but there are some points of it that will look a little different as we acquire more knowledge. Anyway. All right, so may, it's a pronoun, and it means me or myself. Okay. Quid, it means again, pronoun, what. Nihil is a noun, means nothing. And what's nice about Wheelock is they give you English derivatives from these words. Nil, nihilism, annihilate, which is fun. So non, adverb, it means not. Saipe, it's the word we just saw, means often. Si means if. It's a conjugation. Now, here is our first full verb. It means to love, to like, they say. So this is first conjugation because, okay, so here you have the first form. So every verb has, this is the present stem. Amo, I love. So as you know, the O means I, so I love. And then they give you the infinitive form so that you are able to tell that this is a first conjugation verb because of the a, right? It's not amere, it's amare. So we know it's first conjugation, right? So we know this is going to be amo, and then amas, amat, amamus, amatis, amat, right? And then, so that's the present tense, which is what we're learning today with ost, mustis, nt. And then this is the infinitive that tells us what those forms look like because it's first conjugation in this case. Amawi, amatum, memorize those forms. I realize you don't know what they mean yet, but I recommend flashcards. Write this whole dictionary entry out for this verb. Amo, comma, amare, comma, amawi, comma, amatum, comma, and include your macron marks. And you can include accents if you want. Okay, but it means to love, right? All right, cogito, cogitare, cogitavi, cogitatu, to think, to ponder, consider. And when they give you multiple definitions of a word like that, it's not that the word means each of these things. What they're trying to do is no language translates one-to-one exactly. Everything is an approximation. So they are giving you a group of English words to help you understand the essence of what's happening in this Latin word. Now, if you'd like, you can choose from this list of words whichever word fits the context of the sentence that you're translating. But just know that these words are here just to kind of give you a general idea of what the essence of cogito, cogitare means in Latin. But in English, we don't have an exact meaning, exact one-to-one, word-for-word translation, right? All translation is technically interpretation. Okay, going on. Debeo, debere, debui, debitum. Okay, to O. I'm not going to read you all these definitions, but I will read you the Latin because it's good. Do, dare, dedi, datum. Okay. Erro, there's that growling canin, right? That growling dog. Erro, errare, erravi, erratum. Laudo, this is our sample word. Let me make sure this is focused for you. I think that's good. Laudo, laudare, laudavi, laudatum. Okay. Moneo, here's our other sample word. Moneo, monere, monui, monitum. Salveo, salvere. And that was the first word we looked at. Remember, be well. It's a Roman greeting. Be well. All right. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. There we go. It's a little better. Servo, servare, servavi, servatum. Conservo, conservare, conservavi, conservatum. Terreo, terrere, terui, territum. Now note this is to frighten, not to be afraid of something. It is to frighten. Right, it's where we get the word terrorist from, right? They frighten you. Valeo, valere, valui, valiturum. Now this salve was the greeting, be well. The farewell in ancient Rome would have been vale, which of course is an imperative, second person singular. Right? And if you're saying goodbye to a group of people, it'd be valete, valete. All right? Video, videre, vidi, visum. Voco, vocare, vocavi, vocatum. Okay, and if we look at the infinitive form, again, we have voco, we'll just use this as an example, vocare, vocavi, vocatum. 4 principal parts here, okay? four principal parts: voco, vocare, vocabi, vocatum. This is the present stem. It's first person, I call, right? Vocare, to call, that's our infinitive. And then vocavi, I'll just tell you it's perfect. It's first person perfect, I have called. And then vocatum is, it doesn't have person, but it is perfect passive. And to get off track a little bit, this is typically where your adjectives are formed from. Most adjectives come from a perfect passive form of the verb. Okay, we'll get into all that later. But the point at hand is vocare, looking at the infinitive form, tells us this is first conjugation because the a. Video, videre, vide tells us this is second conjugation. Right? That's the important thing here. And if you go through this list of verbs that they give us here, you will find that all of these are either first conjugation or second conjugation, which is very convenient because that is all that we have learned so far. All right? So go ahead, and I recommend making flashcards. Write the Latin, the full Latin on one side, and then write, for example, saipe would be on the front, and then on the flip side you would write adverb, and then what it means in English often, right? That's what I do. That's my recommendation. So make sure you are memorizing your vocabulary as we go from lesson to lesson, because if you don't, your Latin life will become somewhat miserable fairly quickly. So stay on top of that, because Latin, like any other language, is going to be accumulative, and everything builds upon itself, and everything is used from chapter to chapter. Okay, let's take a look at the exercises. Again, I recommend going through and just reading everything that I am skipping over with you, but this is what you would call homework. So I will provide the answers, or that is the translation for sententii, sentences. I will provide the answers to these on Patreon. So patrons, subscribers on Patreon, is $10 a month. I will upload the answers to these translations. But go ahead and work on these. And if you'd like help with the exercises here, go ahead and subscribe to Patreon. It's $10 a month, and the lesson will be there for that as well. All right, let's flip the page here. So that was the sententii is Latin to English. That is, you were given the Latin and you provide the English translation. You should be able to do all this with the vocabulary list that you've been given, but sometimes in the beginning, Latin can be complicated. So the second set of exercises, you're going from English to Latin. Again, this is probably the harder part, is going Latin to English is somewhat easy. Going from English to Latin is kind of an artificial exercise, but it is good to make you think backwards the other way around to reinforce your Latin. So, like, for example, I'll do this first one for you. So it would be, right, what's the word for what in Latin? It's quid, if you remember from the vocab. Now, in English, we have the help. What is that? A helping verb, does. We don't have that sort of thing in Latin. What does he see? So we know it's third person singular, and we know it's the verb to see. So we know it's video, videre, right? So it's going to be, and then the inflection for third person singular is vidate, right? So it's just going to be vidate. And then we also know that E before T is short. Can you see that? Yeah, so what does he see? In Latin, it just looks like quid vidate. Right? So it's not, it kind of seems like there's something missing, but everything is accounted for in those two Latin words. Latin is a lot more efficient than English in that way. But go ahead and work through these. Try to work through them. Do the best you can, even if it's wrong. And then you can check it with my answers on the Patreon page, where I'll upload that lesson that goes over that. I will not be providing a translation for these little paragraphs in Latin. Not right now. I'll just be doing the Sanctentii over here. Sanctentii. So all of those 1 through 15, and then in the English 16 through 20. So I'll provide answers for those. If you want to take a stab at this Latin paragraph, it is fun if you're into that kind of fun. But that is it. This gives you some kind of history of Rome, just fun tidbits. These additional readings at the end, like the history of Rome, it's not, you don't have to read them to understand Latin. It's really just for fun. So if you enjoy that sort of thing, have at it. But it's not crucial to learning Latin. And again, more just kind of fun reading and that sort of thing. Okay, so let's see here. That is the end. Yep. So that is the end of lesson 2, chapter 1. And our next lesson, lesson 3, will be over chapter 2, which is going to be nouns. So then we can put verbs and nouns together. So that'll be lesson number 3. All right, I hope you found lesson 2, chapter 1. I hope you found this helpful. And but yeah, check out Patreon. It's $10 a month if you'd like help with the Sanctentii, sentences, translation. But otherwise, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for watching. Have a good day, and I will see you next week.